this is how you know Usyk is pound for pound number one. If Crawford were to go up and fight better BF and Bivol, that's some. Let's talk fight theories. We will talk science later. I'm just building upon a foundation I already laid down several months ago, talking about the top 3 pound for pound fighters. Terrence Crawford at that time, double undisputed. Naoya Inoue at that time, double undisputed. Alexander Usyk with 3 belts at that time. He is now double undisputed. But at that time, Alexander Usyk had beaten a few top heavyweights and a really great underrated heavyweight, in my opinion, Anthony Joshua, who I always thought was underrated out of the 3 trio of Fury, Wilder, and Joshua. There's always this interesting conversation because when we talk about the definition of pound for pound and the reason why pound for pound exists, it exists to look at smaller fighters. So particularly looking at their skills and saying, well, if they were scaled up based off of the skills they have, if they brought that with them, and they were proportionally or relatively the same size as a fighter in a higher weight class, that smaller fighter would win because their skills got scaled up with them and they have superior skills. Now, pound for pound is by its nature and by its definition hypothetical. It relies on hypotheses, relies on inferences, a warping of reality, and a little bit of imagination, which isn't a bad thing. In fact, I think pound for pound is really useful because it draws attention to fighters that deserve it, fighters that are masters of the science. Otherwise, people might not talk about Naoya Inoue as much. They might not talk about Terrence Crawford as much in the welterweight division, which is one of the glamour divisions, but it's primarily that way because of somebody way back then, Sugar Ray Robinson, who's the reason why pound for pound exists now. Now, it's important that the smaller fighters get their credit because they're mentioned in the pound for pound conversation. So the pound for pound conversation really grounds and puts a magnifying glass on the smaller fighters, and they get more credit because of that. They would get credit, but they get more credit. However, there is an inherent bias that sometimes blockades bigger divisions like heavyweights because pound for pound was originally intended for smaller fighters. Particularly smaller fighters that were overshadowed by heavyweights, so the conversation usually kind of pushes heavyweights away, which I kind of agree with because it doesn't make sense to hold someone to the standard of going up multiple weight classes, fighting bigger opponents, and then have someone that just sits in one division and doesn't go up or down, and they don't prove their pound for pound status by literally bringing their pounds with them across multiple weight classes. When we talk pound for pound, there's a hypothetical process. Well, what if this fighter, what if, there's a lot of what ifs, there's a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas. The beautiful thing about Alexander Usyk being pound for pound number one, which to me he unquestionably is because there's no hypothetical. Unlike a lot of pound for pound, unlike pound for pound in general, is there's so many hypotheticals, what ifs, would, could, should, whatever. Alexander Usyk is the smaller dude that came up and used his skills to dominate bigger dudes. He did that. Like that's how he's here right now. But he's proportionally 15% smaller than, let's take Tyson Fury, for example. 15% smaller when it comes to mass, which if we were to use the other 2 pound for pound kings to kind of like ground that and get an idea of what that looks like, Terrence Crawford versus better BF or Bivol, or Naoya Inoue versus any other 140 pound champion. So Teofimo Lopez, Subriel Matias, Devin Haney, Isaac Cruz, so on and so forth. Now, it's an important distinction I have to draw between my thoughts and perceptions of the hypothetical world, because I do think Crawford is the most skilled fighter in boxing. I've said that in the past leading up to the Spence, after the Spence fight. I've always said that out of the 3, Naoya Inoue, Crawford, Usyk, I've always said Crawford is the most skilled, which means by the definition of pound for pound, he should be my number 1. But I don't think that the definition of pound for pound is just solely on eye test alone, because Crawford is number 1 in the world on my eye test. But I don't think people really just rely on the eye test when they say who's pound for pound 1, 2, 3, whatever. I think there's also an element of greatness. People going up weight classes, fighting bigger people. Like we give fighters a lot of credit for, you know, not just being very skillful, but going up and taking on bigger and bigger challenges. And let's think like relative to the conversation. For example, like when no one is holding Crawford to the standard that he should go up and fight Canelo if he wants to prove himself. No. Now, in fact, they're like, if he wants to fight Canelo, then sure, but he's at such a big weight disadvantage. But then again, That's not even the 15%. And then it's a similar thing with Naoya Inoue versus Tank. No, who only insane people are saying that a 122 pounder should come up 13 pounds to fight Tank, which is big relative to their sizes. Yeah, those standards are ridiculous. Now, with that in mind, Usyk is taking on those ridiculous challenges and doing more than that. He's not just fighting people that are a little bit bigger than him, 40 pounds, 30 pounds heavier than him, fit, like we said, 15% weight gap. That so if Crawford, like this is how you know Usyk is pound for pound number one. If Crawford were to go up and fight better BF and Bivol, that's an important distinction, because Usyk fought Joshua and Fury. So that would be like Crawford going up to fight better BF and Bivol, and he beat them both. First of all, if he were to take the fights, there would be no question he was the best fighter in the world. He's pound for pound number one. But if he were to beat them both, there's no argument. There's no conversation. The only conversation would just be where he is on the all-time great list. Same thing with Naoya Inoue. If he were to go up and beat two of the 140-pound champions, there would be no question that he's pound for pound number one. Now, you can argue like the back end of resumes and all the other stuff that comes with that. But as far as right now, in this moment, the accomplishments combined with the skill, the accomplishments of Alexander Usyk fighting giants and slaying giants and winning and using his skill to get through these massive challenges, yeah, he is pound for pound number one. But I just wanted to elaborate on the concept of pound for pound and why I think Alexander Usyk without question deserves that number one spot. So yeah, we're just talking a little bit of fight theories and we'll talk science later on. I do want to break down this one MMA fighter. Let's see if I get it out tonight. Stick around and find out. I'll see y'all later, fight scientists. I'm out.